Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 8980 under Committee Report number 155. This pertains to the 2024 General Appropriations Act. The parliamentary status is that we have sponsored the measure and we are now in the period of interpellation. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion of the Majority Floor Leader, motion is approved.
Mr. President, under the agenda this morning is the interpellation on the general principles. With that, I move that we recognize the sponsor and chairperson of the Committee on Finance, the distinguished senator from Aurora, Senator Sani Angara, and to interpolate our minority leader, our deputy minority leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros. I move that they be recognized.
Our distinguished Deputy Minority Floor Leader is recognized, and the sponsor is a gentleman from Aurora, Senator Sani Angara. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we accept questions from the good Deputy Minority Leader, we'd just like to acknowledge the presence of our economic managers, economic team. We have with us DOF Secretary Ben Diokno, DBM Secretary Amina Pangandaman, NEDA Secretary Arsenio Balisacan, who's celebrating his birthday today. He's very happy to be here. Monetary Board Member Rosalia De Leon, who is representing BSP Governor Eli Remolona, who is in a international conference. Senior Deputy Executive Secretary Hubert Guevara, Bureau of Treasury OIC Sharon Almanza, Bureau of Customs Commissioner Ruben Rubio, BIR Commissioner Romeo Lumagi Jr. And I'd like to greet our colleagues and you, Mr. President, and our Majority Leader, and our Minority Leader, and our Deputy Minority Leader. Good morning.
Magandang umaga rin po, Maayong buntag, Mr. President, and good morning to Mr. Chair.
The NEDA Secretary. Yes, we'd like to also greet a happy birthday to the NEDA Secretary, Secretary Balisacan. My apologies, Madam Risa. Please proceed.
No apologies necessary, Mr. President. Salamat kaayo. And once again, good morning to our good chair and sponsor, and to the whole Government Economic Managers team, and especially a happy birthday to Secretary RC. And an even happier and healthier New Year of Life, Sec RC. So, muli magandang araw po sa ating lahat. In 2024 and beyond, the Marcos administration will be pulling out all stops to market the Philippines as a hot investment destination. That is good. But we have to ask, paano tayo magiging competitive sa pandaigdigang merkado kung tumataas ang bilang ng nagugutom? Maraming Pinoy ang nagtitiis sa low-quality jobs. At ang learning poverty ng ating kabataan ay pinakamalala sa East Asia and Pacific region. Mr. President, ang binabalangkas nating 2024 national budget ay dapat maghatid ng solusyon sa mga pinakaseryosong developmental at fiscal challenges ng bansa. Dapat nating tugunan ang epekto ng tumataas na inflation sa Pilipinas kasama ng high interest rates sa purchasing power ng piso. Higit dyan, dapat nating aksyonan sa pamamagitan ng 2024 budget ang kalunos-lunos na 2.3 milyong Pilipino na bumaba sa poverty line dahil sa COVID-19 pandemic. Sa taong 2024, Mr. President, kailangan nating ng national budget na nakatapak sa lupa. Kailangan nating ng national budget na walang mispriorities. Ang limitadong pondo ng bayan dapat mapunta sa aktwal na kailangan ng ating mga kababayan. We have to do so much amid a very, very tight fiscal space. Like many countries in the post-pandemic era, our fiscal situation is characterized by high debt and high deficit. We need to better manage our national debt and the deficit, but more importantly, set spending priorities that raise growth. Growth that is both inclusive and fiscally sustainable. And yes, that means rechanneling allocations like confidential funds in civilian agencies with no direct relation to national defense and public safety, and funds that eat up other sources of development financing like the Maharlika Investment Fund. Ngayong panahon ng krisis, malayo ang maaabot ng bawat piso ng pamahalaan sa pag-angat ng buhay ng Pilipino. So having said that, I'd like to begin by asking questions about the national government's spending performance. Back in August, Mr. President, good chair, our economic managers acknowledged the persistent problem of underspending and directed agencies with poor spending performance to come up with catch-up plans. The Treasury's report shows that in the first half of this year, the target disbursement level was 2.58 trillion pesos. However, actual disbursements in the first half of the year were only 2.42 trillion pesos. May we know which specific departments and agencies contributed to the lower than target disbursement performance and why they had not spent what they committed to spend in the first half of the year? And has DBM been able to zero in on which projects and programs were lagging behind, Mr. President?
According to the Department of Budget Secretary, they've just presented to to Malacanang, to the President, the catch-up plans of the various agencies. As to the question of which agencies are contributing to the underspending, these are the top ones. The top, in terms of underspending, Your Honor, are the DICT, the DMW, the DSWD, the DOE, and the DOT.
And the DOT. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Has DBM also identified why or the reasons they hadn't spent according to disbursement targets in the first semester?
Well, there are some varied reasons, Your Honor. There are procurement-related difficulties, such as the late delivery of goods. Sometimes there are failed biddings. There are checks which have yet to be disbursed. I suppose this is with respect to DSWD, the ongoing implementation of social protection programs, like the 4Ps, requires a lot of preliminary work, like profiling, registration, evaluation, and validation of beneficiaries, Your Honor. These are just some of the reasons.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And among these 5 top or lowest spending departments, nakapag-zero in na rin po ba yung DBM on which particular programs and projects were lagging?
Example, DICT. Yan yung mga programs niya na kailangan siyang catch up. DMW.
Yeah, there are some, with respect to the DICT, the programs where they have to catch up are those lodged in the Office of the Secretary, the ICT Systems Infrastructure Development Advisory Program, the e-Government Program, the Government Emergency Communication Systems Program, ICT Systems and Infrastructure Management Program, ICT Governance Program, ICT and Cybersecurity Policies Management Program, ICT Workforce Reskilling, the Digital Transformation Centers or Tech for Ed program, as well as other projects like the National Broadband, National Government Portal, among others, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I suppose there are also, therefore, identified programs and projects for the 4 other disbursement.
Yes, for
lagging
DMW,
departments.
there's the overseas, for the OSEC, Overseas Employment Facilitation Services, the Overseas Employment Regulatory Program, the Promotion of International Labor Affairs. For the DSWD, there is the 4Ps program, the Protective Services for Individuals and Families in Difficult Circumstances, the Sustainable Livelihood Program, the Supplementary Feeding Program, the Multi-Sectoral Nutrition Project, the National Household Targeting System for Poverty Reduction, Those are the programs with respect to DSWD. For the DOE, there is the Biofuels Program, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Program, National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Program, the Alternative Fuels and Technologies Program, Nuclear Energy Program, Philippine Conventional Energy Contracting Program, among others. And the fifth agency is the DOT, or the Department of Tourism. There is the Market and Product Development Program, the Tourism Policy Formulation and Planning Program, the Branding Campaign Program, and the Philippine Commission on Sports Scuba Diving Program, Your Honor.
Thank you so much, Mr. President and Mr. Chair. And I suppose these lagging programs and projects are also identified and targeted for catch-up in the catch-up plans. Maybe also please have copies of the catch-up plans.
Yes, certainly, Your Honor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Among the catch-up plans include the constitution of additional BACs, or Bids and Awards Committees, the engagement of additional workers to assist in procurement, capacitating the procurement management teams. For the DMW, it's strengthening the Migrant Workers Office, enhancing the full cycle reintegration program of OFWs, hiring of the newly created 198 positions for OFW hospitals, and the reprioritization of the repatriation fund for the requirements of assistance to nationals. For DSWD, there's the fast-tracking, the validation and assessment of households for the 4Ps, the following up on the social preparation process of the regional offices for the supplementary feeding, the fast-tracking of the approval of proposals on regular projects at the regional levels, as well as the approval of partnership agreements. For the DOE, there's the conduct of information, education campaigns, and public consultations, as well as focus group discussions on energy projects of national significance, Your Honor, among others.
Thank you so much again, Mr. Chair, and we look forward to what the Chair has committed, hard copies of the catch-up plans. Thank you very much for that. Now, our analysis of the DBM's latest status of allotment, obligation, and balances shows that a number of agencies posted either low obligation or disbursement rates, which we've started talking about, the latter. Three major departments are particularly glaring. Kung kanina sa disbursement may top or bottom five or lagging five, dito naman po sa either low obligation or low disbursements, so tatlo yung gusto kong itanong. The Department of Agriculture has a 60% obligation rate, but only 47% disbursement rate. 47 of the 60% obligation rate. Department of Transportation has a 42% obligation rate and only 28% disbursement rate out of that. And the Department of Public Works and Highways, 75% obligation rate, but only 33% disbursement rate out of that. And if I'm not mistaken, these are also the same agencies among the agencies with the highest budget allocations in the national budget. Their spending performances are critical to drive growth, and for DA in particular, to cushion the effect of food inflation. So, pwede po bang malaman kung yung low disbursement performances nitong ahensya, itong tatlo in particular, ay nag-ambag din dun sa quarter-on-quarter decline sa GDP mula 7.1% nung first quarter of 2023 sa 4.3% sa second quarter.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
And regarding the low obligation rates, I don't handle the budgets of the DA and the DOTR. So maybe during those agencies, they can better explain why they have not achieved higher obligation rates. But for DPWH, which I defend, usually the picture improves on a 2-year horizon because in the first year, there's usually a lower obligation and disbursement rate. But in the second year, it usually reaches the 80s or 90s, Your Honor. Actually, even during an 18-month time horizon. So it takes time for some of these projects to get going. But eventually, they do contribute to economic activity and contributing to GDP, Your Honor.
So we'll be looking out for that and hoping for that, Mr. Chair, anytime now or at the end of the two-year horizon, particularly for the DPWH. Now, which of the infrastructure department's big-ticket programs have not been obligated to date and which have significant undisbursed cash cover?
Big ticket items daw. While the Secretary is retrieving that information, Your Honor, just to update
Thank you,
on
Mr.
the figures for the DA, I was handed some more recent figures as of September 30. The obligation for DA is at 75.8% with a disbursement of 63.8%. For DPWH, it's 87.5% with a disbursement of 50.9%. For DOTR, obligation of 61% and a disbursement of 35.2%, Your Honor. So these are the updated figures for the three agencies Her Honor mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what about particularly for DPWH, the previous year's disbursements?
For 2022, Your Honor?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. President.
DP. For the DPWH, it's 95.7 for 2022, Your Honor. That's the obligation rate.
And disbursement, Mr. Chair?
Disbursement rate over obligations is 64.1%, Your Honor.
64.1. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So back to my previous question about the big-ticket programs, which of these of the infrastructure departments haven't been obligated to date and which have significant
We don't have the
undisbursed
details now, Your
cash?
Honor,
All
but
right.
during the particular agency budget discussions, we can provide those details with respect to DOTR, DA, DPWH, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And aside from the big-ticket programs, which of the DA's programs and projects have also not been obligated to date? And maybe overall, Mr. Chair, where are the bottlenecks for these three departments?
Your Honor, maybe it's best to ask those questions during the DA budget because this representation is, quite frankly, not very knowledgeable about the DA budget.
All right. Then at least for the DPWH, where are the bottlenecks?
With DPWH, I think right-of-way is one bottleneck. Ano pa? Ha? Bakit? What's the bottleneck? Why? I think some of the projects that don't have the preliminary work, like the detailed engineering and design, Your Honor, yeah, feasibility studies, so that sets back the timelines for some of the projects. But again, the details are perhaps better discussed during the agency budget discussion, Your Honor, since right now we're discussing general principles, Your Honor.
Yes, I understand, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So, all right, also, so as to even better prepare for the agency budget plenary interpellations, maybe request a report detailing these, the programs and projects that haven't been obligated to date per these three departments especially. Pati yung ibang mga department na nag-post either ng low obligation or low disbursement.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for the heads up. We'll certainly ask them to provide the figures you request.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair. So now, DBM has, as we were talking about earlier, directed departments and agencies to come up with catch-up plans. And I hear that They have submitted these to the President, and we do await copies also. And earlier, the Chair informed us kung ano-ano per yung 5 nangungunang may low disbursement sa ngayon, ano yung mga corrective measures na gagawin. So let's take a step backward. Can the Chair enlighten us on the monitoring process that DBM is conducting to help agencies improve their budget utilization rates? And how often does DBM monitor agencies with problematic spending performance?
The DBM is recommending certain steps for agencies to speed up. Number one, there's the conduct of early procurement activities. Secondly, is the provision of capacity building and training for the procuring entities. The third is the adoption of the, what does IFMIS stand for? IFMIS, or the Integrated Financial Management Information System. Through the Budget Treasury Management System, these are technical terms, BTMS, across all agencies to allow for real-time transaction monitoring across agencies, Your Honor. Fourth is to direct the preparation of agency roadmaps, as we discussed earlier. The fifth is to incorporate policies in the annual budget circular on the release of funds, which is to prioritize the big-ticket items at the start of the year. And sixth is to encourage all government agencies to utilize safe and efficient digital payments for goods and services, including the distribution of financial assistance to the public, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, these are further and perhaps even more strategic across the board for all agencies and departments, corrective measures that DBM is implementing or will be implementing. But what is the monitoring process that DBM uses in order to spot problem areas, in order to formulate proposed solutions, and proactively encourage the departments and agencies to spend better and more timely?
There's a quarterly monitoring, Your Honor, on the part of DBM for the various agencies, where they submit their progress reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
But that's
Yes.
one thing that the BTMS, which we mentioned earlier, Your Honor, might help a lot, because then it's real-time monitoring of the projects, Your Honor.
Yes, exactly, Mr. Chair. I think that's one of the most important things that the DBM can share with us, even in this initial discussion about the general principles of the 2024 budget. Kasi, and this is actually leading to my last question on this topic of underspending. Siyempre, yung catch-up plans, mabuti siya kung within a year nakikita natin mabagal yung paggastos natin. Pero corrective measure na lang siya at palapit na sa finish line ng taong iyon. But it's really good to know that not only is DBM, of course, already conducting quarterly monitoring, pero iniisip na rin yung possibility ng real-time monitoring. And useful din po yun, hindi lang para sa gobyerno, para sa atin na nagtatrabaho sa gobyerno, even the private sector, even civil society, citizens, taxpayers, para unang buwan pa lang ng taon, medyo may feedback, may information sa ibang stakeholders, and then may feedback mechanism para mas timely din makapag-catch up early and not later in the year. So before I get to that last question, just this other one, Mr. Chair, what is the current total magnitude of obligated and unobligated balances in the 2023 GAA?
That's unobligated. Obligated is. The obligated amounts are total around 4.08 trillion, Your Honor, whereas the unobligated amounts total around 1.27 trillion, Your Honor.
1.27 trillion. At ilang percent ng 2023 pa po ito, yung 1.27 trillion? Mga 20, less than 20%, Mr. Chair?
The 76% is the obligation rate, Your
Yes.
Honor. The
Okay.
disbursement rate is 80%, Your Honor.
So kung 76% po yung obligated na, so yung unobligated pa na balance is about 24%.
Yes, Your Honor.
And then, sorry, I missed to write down yung sinabi yung magkano na yung disbursed sa
That's
total obligations.
80%, Your Honor.
80% po nun.
Yes.
All right. And then, okay, so 80% of the total obligations. Tapos, anong percent yun ng total allotments and appropriation? So, 80% of 76%.
Sorry, just you're asking, what's the question? The percent of,
Anong percent yung 80% disbursed na sa total allotments and appropriations?
61%, Your Honor.
61%. Salamat, Mr. Chair. Now, I believe these will give us a real sense of the absorptive capacity of the various departments and agencies. Tas lalo na pag bin-breakdown na natin per department, per agency. So lastly, Mr. Chair, about this topic, as I mentioned earlier, catch-up plans are short-term solutions or immediate, urgent solutions to inefficient spending. Besides digitalization, na binanggit na rin ng good share, what other institutional reforms does DBM intend to roll out to tackle the low absorptive capacity and inefficient spending of agencies? Idagdag ko, ano yung institutional reforms ang i-roll out, balak i-roll out ng DBM, papunta doon, for example, sa real-time monitoring, Mr. Chair?
There are a number of projected reforms with respect to procurement, Your Honor. There's even a draft bill which was submitted to us a few weeks ago, and we had one hearing on it to amend the GPRA, or the Government Procurement Reform Act, the RA 9184. So that's a whole series of reforms, Your Honor, and that will be definitely system-wide. And another is the conduct of early procurement activities. They are recommending that. And of course, capacity building and training for all the procuring entities, among others, Your Honor.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we ask these questions as a matter of accountability, as is often pointed out in COA audit reports. We deprive taxpayers of public goods and services whenever agencies don't efficiently spend, or worse, when funds are unspent. And it's good to know na dito sa mga niro-roll out na institutional reforms, meron na ring ask sa atin dito sa Kongreso in terms of amendment of one of the important laws. So, salamat para doon, Mr. Chair. Moving on now to on improving the targeting of beneficiaries. Kanina na-note ko na yung isa sa slow programs sa DSWD, halimbawa ay yung 4Ps, no? Pati SLP. So, tawag pansin talaga. We were told by NEDA naman during the DBCC hearing that in the face of high inflation and economic volatility, that will strengthen our safety nets and ensure that they're better targeted. We believe better targeting will also contribute to fast-tracking the implementation of key government programs, and thus the budget utilization of agencies such as the DA and others, which we earlier talked about, that posted low or are posting low disbursement rates. So can we ask the NEDA to please identify the budget requirements so that the lists of persons and enterprises na nagde-deserve ng suporta ay makumpleto sa 2024 at maging sa 2025. I actually have a partial enumeration of lists, Mr. Chair. Non-colorum drivers and operators who are supposed to be supported by the DOTR subsidies for the PUV modernization program. Jeepney and tricycle drivers, farmers and fisher folk who are supposed to benefit from fuel subsidies. farmers and fisherfolk who must be included in the various DA registries, like the registry system for basic sectors in agriculture, or the RSBSA, FishR, National Coconut Farmers Registry System, and the registry of ARB beneficiaries whose loans are to be condoned. Gayon din yung registry of priority beneficiaries of the DSUDS 4PH program, who are to be given priority for housing subsidies. Registry of graduates of the Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program of the DSWD, which, according to the DSWD, will continue to receive livelihood support. And registry of beneficiaries of the new food stamp program of the DSWD, that, according to the recent statement of the NEDA Secretary, is set to be scaled up in time for the El Nino. So at the proper time, Mr. Chair, and in consultation with NEDA, will the sponsor and chair of the Finance Committee join me in ensuring na may budget support para sa generation at pagkumpleto ng mga registries na ito?
Yes, certainly, Your Honor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Dako naman po ako sa EO 138. During the DBCC briefing more than a year ago, we were told by our economic managers that there was a DBM, NEDA, DOF technical working group that has already or had already formulated amendments to EO 138. That set of rules, which generally goes in the direction of reducing central government spending for activities listed in the local government code as having been devolved. And during the DBCC briefing a year before that, we were also told that there was an ongoing ADB research that would recommend options for the new division of labor between the central and local governments, given that the Garcia-Mandanas ruling took revenue proceeds from the central government and delivered these to our LGUs. Last I heard, EO 138 has not been repealed, but it is also not being implemented. In other words, the NEP and the GAB continue to propose spending on some items, that LGUs can now very well afford. Will government's indebtedness increase even more because central government continues to spend money that we no longer have at the Treasury, Mr. Chair?
Your Honor, the study, you're correct. There's a study that the executive is undergoing, and they've tasked NEDA Secretary RC to head that. And that will be done in February of next year. And they will present the results to the President, Your Honor. But yes, yes, it's really difficult to kind of balance the needs of the various local LGUs given that EO. And that EO is currently, well, not being implemented, or the implementation has been postponed pending the results of the study, Your Honor. And perhaps, maybe it's incumbent upon Congress to maybe amend the local government code because no matter what the executive branch recommends, they place guidelines. Like I remember in past NEPs or GABs, there were limitations as for classroom school building to be limited to 4th, 5th, 6th class municipalities. But
Yes.
it was also Congress which removed those restrictions, Your Honor. So that's the irony, you know. So, you know, you really, if you want something to be really binding, then of course the law is the most binding instrument, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. Chair. And since the results and probably recommendations of that study will be complete and presented to the President in 3 months' time yet, in another quarter of a year yet, then I'm just thinking aloud, Mr. Chair, then perhaps the taking on of additional indebtedness will maybe wait a bit for the recommendations that will be presented in February of 2024 yet. And I'm glad also that the good chair mentioned possible amendments to the local government code, kasi naalala ko po, just 7 years ago, nag-uusap po kami ng good chair, na-excite kami sa posibilidad, ano kaya? Dahil silver anniversary noon ng Local Government Code of 1991, parang napapanahon i-review yung implementation niya, and there, of course, in aid of legislation, possibly give birth to some updating, improvements, amendments. So I'm glad to hear the chair mention that possibility again now, especially dahil after that historic LGC, nasundan ng historic na Mandanas-Garcia ruling and has really important implications para sa spending share division of labor between national and local governments. Of course, Mr. Chair, no, for the record po, Mr. President, I think we should have a policy of continuing to support LGUs, even in the financing of some of the projects that had already been listed as devolved under the local government code. At isa nga ito sa nung nakaraang administrasyon, maya't maya, ina-argue ko kay dating Sec Dominguez. But we should be more selective and try to do more with less. We should focus on projects that are given less attention by our LGU officials, possibly because the benefits and costs of some important projects exceed their term of office as LGU officials, or the costs and benefits of some important projects go beyond the jurisdictions where they get their votes. And ilan ito sa mga interesanting programa at proyekto, di ba? Going beyond the politico-administrative boundaries, kunyari to ecosystems that span more than one municipality or city. And as a last point on this topic, for example, I think we should continue to spend on projects that address floods, droughts, dwindling fish supplies, so lahat ng may kinalaman sa climate change at disaster resilience din natin. Also gaps in rural-urban logistics and value chains, animal diseases, and just overall readiness for climate change extremes. And then, of course, we should do more for those LGUs that have less. Kaya salamat sa pagbanggit nyo, Mr. Chair, dun sa yung pagsuporta pa rin sa 4th and 5th class municipalities. So, yun lang po yung mga tanong ko dun sa EO 138. Dako naman po ako, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, dun sa itong contingent fund. So, with respect to the augmentation of the CIF from the contingent fund, as was done last year for the Office of the Vice President, we wish to propose an amendment to the current special provision of the contingent fund. Again, as a matter of fiscal prudence, we'd like to include the augmentation of the CIF as a prohibition under the contingent fund, along with a prohibition to tap the said fund for the purchase, say, of motor vehicles. The current text is special provision. I'll just read it, Mr. President, Mr. Chair. The amount of 13 billion pesos appropriated herein shall cover the funding requirements of new or urgent activities or projects of national government agencies, GOCCs, and LGUs that need to be implemented or paid during the year, such as, but not limited to, the following: legal obligation of the government arising from final and executory decisions of competent authorities, such as compromise agreements, arbitral awards, mediation settlement agreement, and professional services in connection thereto, requirements of newly created offices, or deficiencies in the appropriations for local and external travels of the President of the Philippines. In no case shall this fund be used for the purchase of motor vehicles, including any improvements thereon. Would the sponsor be willing to discuss this representation's proposed amendment?
Yes, certainly, Your Honor.
At the proper
I think
time.
there's some merit in that. But I'm just being told that there may, it may, if it's overbroad, Your Honor, it may hamper some of the security agencies, Your Honor. So perhaps there may be an exception to the exception, or an exception to your proposal, in case that there are emergencies, because I think there have been occasions in the past where they found the need to supplement the security agencies, not just the civilian agencies, Your Honor.
And this representation would have no quarrel with that, Mr. Chair. Salamat sa paalala, but definitely yung iniisip kong i-propose na amendment at the proper time will not pertain to security agencies that have clear national defense and public safety mandates and expertise, kundi sa mga civilian agencies na wala namang direktang mga ganon.
Understood, Your Honor.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. So moving to my my last topic, Mr. Chair, on DBP, Land Bank, Maharlika, and budgetary support to government corporations. So first on the withdrawal of the 75 billion pesos, Land Bank and DBP Capital, the good sponsor himself introduced a provision to the Maharlika bill stating that the contributions of Land Bank and DBP to the equity and the projects of the Maharlika Corporation should not exceed 25% of the net worth of these banks. Do we know if we might need to infuse equity into DBP and Land Bank because of the possibility that this 25% limitation might already have been breached when DBP and Land Bank wrote 75 billion pesos worth of checks for the Maharlika Corporation?
I'm told the answer is no, Your Honor, because the contribution in percentage terms of the two banks is 3 and 4% respectively, Your Honor. So still far from the 25% threshold that we. Thank you for reminding us about that.
Yes, nasa batas mismo. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and of course you are very welcome. So the answer is that we will not need to infuse equity because allegedly we are way below the 25% limit. And of course, Mr. Chair, I'd like to impose the burden of proof not on the sponsor himself, but on the DOF, on the Land Bank, and the DBP. So could we please ask Land Bank, Development Bank, and the DOF Secretary to submit a report demonstrating their compliance with this 25% limitation, even after the banks convey their 75 billion pesos to the equity to the Maharlika Corporation.
We will do that, Your Honor.
Thank you.
They will do that.
Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you. I wonder, Mr. Chair, ang batas po ba at yung IRRs nun, pinapayagan ba yung infusion nitong total na 75 billion pesos papasok sa Maharlika Corporation na gawin on an installment basis, for example? Para halimbawa, ang Kongreso hindi kailangan mag-infuse ng capital talaga sa Land Bank at sa DBP sa 2024. At para talagang yung 25% rule hindi malalabag, which we will assess based on the report, at para yung mga importanteng kliyente ng Land Bank at DBP, masaserve pa rin nila.
The 75 billion is the initial funding, Your Honor. So, according to Treasurer Lea, now with the Monetary Board, yeah, the law provides that must be
Lump sum, Mr. Chair.
provided immediately, Your Honor.
So, initial siya, initial funding. So, therefore, hindi po siya pwedeng i-infuse on installment basis.
I mean, never mind. I'm told it's not possible, Your Honor.
It's not
because the
possible.
law is clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, and since not possible, at ito, ang premise ko kasi dito sa susunod na tanong, Mr. Chair, ay baka pag nabasa namin yung report, mapapatunayan yung pangamba ng ibang mga observers na na-breach na yung 25% limit na yon. Then, equity might need to be infused into Land Bank and DBP, say to the total tune of 75 billion pesos. At mangangailangan tayo maghanap ng source o sources para sa equity infusion na iyan. So ngayon, Mr. Chair, mga tanong ko tungkol sa Maharlika Finance via DBP at saka Land Bank, kaugnay ng private sector investing. Dahil if it is indeed the case, as reported in the news, na yung 50 billion pesos from Land Bank at 25 billion pesos from DBP will be charged against the capital of these two banks, then is it correct to say that the consequence of the transfer of 75 billion in DBP and Land Bank capital is a reduction of about 600 billion pesos in the ability to lend of these two banks? Gaya ng unang babala ng credit rating firm Fitch at pati ng investment banker na si Stephen Kuunyeng.
During the deliberations, I was reminded by former Treasurer Lea, that Land Bank themselves said that they had 1.3 trillion in investable funds, Your Honor, and DBP had 850 billion in investable funds. So I think the 75 billion that the law requires of them is on the prudent side, Your Honor.
So nothing to worry about the warnings of Fitch and Mr. Kaugnay?
None, Your Honor.
Should we also be worried that either DBP or Land Bank will not only need to refuse future, for example, renewable energies and agrarian reform emancipation borrowers, in fact, that one or both of these banks will have to give notice to some of their existing borrowers na baka dali na lang nila yung business nila sa ibang mga bangko na mas willing magpautang sa kanila. Dapat ba tayo mag-alala doon, Mr. Chair?
No, Your Honor.
Well, of course, Mr. Sponsor, again, we'd like to impose the burden of proof on the DOF, the Land Bank, and the DBP, since they claimed to the Senate during the Maharlika hearings that the 75 billion pesos from Land Bank and DBP could be considered idle or not generating good economic returns and could be more usefully placed as equity in the Maharlika Corporation. Could they please provide us a technical report on this, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Those are my last questions on the Maharlika. In these interesting days na hinihingi yata ng isa sa mga bangkong ito na ibalik muna yung in-infuse nilang kapital habang ngayong araw, habang nakasuspend pa ang pag-implementa ng batas na iyon hanggat hindi pa na officially reissue yung implementing rules and regulations. So maraming salamat po sa inyo, Mr. Chair. Daghang salamat, Mr. President.
Many thanks to our Vice Chair and Deputy Minority Leader for her very incisive questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, thank you to our Deputy Minority Leader. Mr. President, can I ask for minutes suspension? We'll just fix the
Yes, while we're waiting for our minority floor leader to ask some questions, maybe if it's with the permission of my dear colleague, Senator Angara, just a quick policy question lang, because I was with the Japanese Prime
Yes,
Minister.
Mr. President. Yes.
Yes, thank you. I was with the Japanese Prime Minister and the delegation last week, and I think we all know the issue, I think even the Secretary knows the issue, is the issue of the VAT refund. I believe we're going to amend the create to make it create more and make a policy move already there, particularly on the issue of the VAT refund. However, the Japanese companies, I was seated beside the cabinet minister of the Prime Minister, basically he's the ES of the Prime Minister. And ang tagal namin pinag-usapan itong problema ng VAT refund. We're in the previous administration. Obviously, when you buy, for example, when the Japanese companies that are manufacturing here buy from local producers these certain goods, and these goods are exported anyways together with their products, the last administration, Your Honors, made it clear na magbabayad muna sila ng VAT and then i-refund pag-export. Ang problema, hindi nagva-VAT refund ang gobyerno natin. And we owe them billions of pesos already, and they've already threatened, well, there are threats that they might move shop to other countries. These are already locators here, Your Honor, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you're aware of this. These are already locators here. Now, prospectively, ayusin natin. Congress, I committed, and the Prime Minister was very happy. He shook my hand and he thanked me. And we're going to see him again on December. I believe the Secretary is also joining me in that trip. That's the APEC trip in so ASEAN-Japan Friendship Summit. That will be on December 15 to 18. The President had asked me to come precisely to be able to confirm that we are going to amend the CREATE law prospectively. Pero ang problema, for example, like companies like Itochu, which run Dole Philippines, which is huge in Bukidnon. Dole in Bukidnon, Your Honor, has about 15,000 employees. If Itochu pulls out of the country, what will happen to Dole Philippines and 42,000 of its employees? They have 42,000 employees, Your Honor, because they cannot get their VAT refund. I'm taking this opportunity because I see the BIR here, the head of the BIR. So what is the policy, Your Honor? This is a policy question. Are we going to refund them? Are we not going to refund them? How are we going to refund them? Is it in this budget to refund them? Because I'm being pestered every day by the Japanese. I'm the head of the Philippine-Japan Friendship Association. Therefore, it is my sole duty to bring this up in plenary and take this up with the, of course, the officers at hand of these departments. Would you like a 1-minute suspension? I'll move for a 1-minute suspension. You can discuss. Person.
It's ready to resume, Mr. President. Yeah.
Yes, the session is resumed.
Mr. President, I was told they have 90 days to pay, and the Secretary said they will pay it. But according to the Commissioner of the BIR, there are some instances where it's already in the courts. So in that case, they have to wait for the final decision for those in the courts. But for those that are due and demandable, they have 90 days to pay that. They promise to pay by the end of the year, Mr. President.
Yeah, but that's a policy issue again. No? I believe that the BIR, I'm not sure if it was this administration or the last administration, their policy was, take us to court. Imagine telling a $1 billion investor, take us to court. So they would rather that this VAT refund, which is automatic in other countries, Senator Angara, we had just come from a visit to Europe and we were all detaxed. Everything was detaxed upon purchase of certain goods. Ganun kabilis. Dito sa atin, take us to court, sabi ng BIR. So now, these poor Japanese companies who are hiring thousands of people in our country are suffering because they have court cases and they would rather settle out of court. But anyway, as you mentioned, nandyan na yan. We can only look prospectively. I hope that the Court of Tax Appeals can act on this quickly para magkaroon ng settlement dito sa issue na to. So you're addressing it. So the answer is yes, they're addressing it, and within 90 days, they will pay the VAT refund. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. That's what I was told by Secretary Ben.
So while we're waiting for the law to be amended, what is the exact policy now? Will they refund or again take us to court?
As long as the documents are complete, Your Honor, they will pay. But in certain cases, I think the documentation is not complete, Your Honor. That's what the Commissioner is telling us.
Mr. Commissioner, please work on that because really that is a black eye. We're trying to sell the country to investors, but this is a recurring theme. Each and every country we discuss because the Japanese Chamber of Commerce is, sa foreign chambers, very influential. So, let me just explain really quickly. For example, you produce bananas in Bukidnon or pineapples. The boxes are locally produced. They would rather buy local boxes, which is, for me, the best thing that they can do, buy from local producers. And then they put the pineapples or bananas in the boxes are shipped abroad. Before, walang problema. That process was VAT-free. Diretso na yan. Kasi exported yan eh. It's not sold locally. Now, they have to pay, when they buy the boxes, they have to pay the VAT to be refunded once it is exported. It's a double layer of, can't we just, that's why we're going to try to amend and create so that it no longer will have to go through that again. Just remove the VAT totally as long as it's for export. And I can see the Secretary is very engaged because that's the next, hopefully, we can create more as soon as possible so that we can address this issue. We committed to the Japanese Prime Minister that we will tackle this at the soonest possible time. Thank you to the BIR Commissioner. I haven't seen you yet, so we haven't spoken personally. Maybe later during the break, I can see you on the side to discuss this at length. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to put this on record because of the successful visit of the Prime Minister last week, who had asked me personally about this issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for raising this very important issue. And also, thank you. Congratulations on your successful invitation to Prime Minister Kishida.
Thank you very much. Hopefully, the next one will be the King of Spain. I hope he accepts our invitation. Our invitation, you were with me when we invited him.
That's right, Mr.
Now we will have the King of Cagayan de Oro. We recognize our Minority Floor Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel, my dear colleague and kababayan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just the king of a certain household in a certain structure along Hay Street in Cagayan de Oro, where more spirits live than human beings, Mr. President. It's an old structure already. So thank you, Mr. President, for this chance. With the permission of our sponsor, Mr. President. So we're still in the topic of the general principles governing our budget for 2024, Mr. President.
Yes, that's correct. Your
I've
Honor.
noticed, Mr. President, that see 2023 GAA compared to 2022 increased by 4.9%. But this one, the proposed budget for 2024 is 9.5% higher than this year's budget. Can we get an explanation as to not only the increase, but the rate of the increase? It's almost a doubling of the increase, relatively speaking or comparatively speaking, Mr. President.
Reflects your optimism about the world economy and the local. It reflects the expectation and the optimism of the economic managers regarding the country's performance and the recovery of the global economy, Your Honor. Although there, of course, because of the various wars, there are headwinds all over the place, Your Honor.
So thank you for that, Mr. President. That means we, of course, when the budget team drafted the budget, they were kind of looking into the future, diba? There were assumptions being made. So may I know the time frame? When did we start the budget process, Mr. President, for this particular one? February? Yeah, the budget call,
Yeah, there's a budget call in January, Your Honor, and the agencies are given until March to submit their budget proposals, Your Honor, and then the DBM goes over them, and the process is terminated at the level of DBM by June, Your Honor, and after the President gives his SONA, there is I think it's a 30-day period under the Constitution to submit the National Expenditure Program to Congress, Your Honor.
Opo. Yan yung budget process natin. No? It all starts with the executive branch, and then we have this team, the DBCC, and of course a specialized department, the DBM, to finalize the president's budget. And of course, they made some assumptions there. Okay, so let's go through the assumptions. And these assumptions were made more or less June 2023. Am I correct, Mr. President? Or earlier than June 2023 when we made these assumptions? Kasi na-fix na natin sa papel yung yung final amounts. Therefore, may time lag yan eh.
There are initial assumptions, Your Honor, but the finalization is, you're correct, around June, Your Honor.
June. Yes, okay, sige po. And then, because I went through the President's message on the budget, so are the assumptions still valid? Daanan natin kung pwede isa-isa. What were the assumptions that I have encountered in the President's message? That our GDP growth rate for 2023 would be 6 to 7%. That's the DBCC team still, anong tawag mo ito? Stick to this projection or assumption?
It's still doable, Your Honor.
Still doable? Okay, sige po. The inflation rate, the executive assumed to be 5 to 6% for the year 2023, so at the end of the year. What's our current position on this? Will it hold?
They're expecting around 6.2, Your Honor.
Okay, pasok pa rin.
So on the high side, yeah. A little higher than the range, yeah.
Okay, above, yeah, above the upper range. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so my question is, if things like this happen, let us say that the assumption behind the budget is that the inflation rate is 5 to 6%, and then the actual inflation rate turns out to be 6.2, which is above the upper limit. How does this affect now the budget execution as well as the budget's efficiency, Mr. President?
Well, this doesn't sound so good, but according to them, inflation is actually good for revenue because they're able to collect more, Your Honor. So,
Well, kawawang taong bayan eh. So,
yes, but that's the byproduct, Your Honor. It's not an intended result.
and only because of indirect taxes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah, so that's why that is one of the evils of indirect taxation, Mr. President. That's why I think, andito naman si Atty. Hubert Guevara eh. So I think if you go to our constitutional law, basic na basic yata yun, that the state should favor a progressive, direct taxation and progressive, hindi yung indirect and regressive, like indirect taxes like VAT. So masama, Mr. President, sa taong bayan, from the point of view of the people, masama.
Well, a higher inflation rate is certainly worse from the point of view of the public, Your Honor.
So is there now? So we made an assumption 5 to 6. Tapos another assumption that most likely we will end at 6.2%. Hindi pa naman tapos yung taon eh. Okay. Are there realistic interventions from government which could possibly bring down that inflation rate and within the range of our original assumption?
Yes, Your Honor. In fact, inflation for October is down to 4.9, and they're expecting it to go to lower from 6% also for succeeding months. And there are a number of measures taken to address the food inflation and mitigate its impact. One is filling the domestic supply gap through timely and adequate importation, strengthening the implementation of biosecurity and hog repopulation programs through the continuous monitoring of ASF, or African swine fever, and the implementation of the Integrated National Swine Production Initiatives for Recovery and Expansion, or INSPIRE, and improving and expanding the Kadiwa program, which directly connects producers and consumers, as well as fast-tracking the distribution of targeted subsidies to farmers and fisher folk, as well as the provision of monthly food credits to the poorest Filipino families. So these are some of the measures which can help to mitigate inflation, as well as the following interventions for crops and livestock and fisheries subsectors. They include buffer stocking of agricultural inputs, provision of short gestation, multi-tolerant seed varieties, provision of organic fertilizer, shifting to alternate crops with less water requirement, and establishing satellite hatcheries as sources of fingerlings. Your Honor, those are the for food inflation. And for non-food inflation, they implement demand management measures such as energy and water conservation and efficiency, the conduct of extensive and timely review of wage and transport petition hikes, to ensure that inflation is not exacerbated, Your Honor.
And regarding that last part, Mr. President, the executive attitude or intervention would be to prevent the hikes. Tama mo ba? Because the by the book analysis is that if we allow the increase in transportation fare, etc., we also increase inflation, Mr. President.
The policy is not to prevent, Your Honor, but to manage the hikes. And they've been managed because they've been gradual, Your Honor, rather than a sudden hike, which, according to them, may be inflationary.
Yes, yun na nga. Itong mga by the book, ano natin kasi, kawawa ang mga kababayan natin naghihirap. Actually, di ba, ang by the book analysis nga is unemployment is good for to bring down because it brings down inflation. Tama po ba yan?
Well, the economic managers are saying they promote job creation, Your Honor. They're not promoting unemployment.
That's correct. Tapos pagdating naman, tingnan natin yung mga yung mga regional wage boards natin. Pag-increase nila ng mga ng mga minimum wage, i-compare natin ano yung rate of increase. The rate of increase reflects the published inflation rate. Ganun lang. Ganun ang nangyayari. So, pati sa mga fare hike, ima-manage, we use the term manage, but actually we're preventing the reasonable, the more justifiable or the fairer increase of prices like fares, which is FARE, which is the fare, transport fare, which is fairer to the drivers, Mr. President. But at any rate, yan yung mga I already heard the answer of our sponsors. So meron tayong executive action to implement the budget, the programs to increase food production. Yun yung una. Okay, so unfortunately, ang utang po ba ay nakaka-contribute din sa inflation? Kasi budget na sagot natin, we will execute the budget. Yung budget naman natin, backed up by utang year after year after year. So, is debt or the increase in our debt related also to inflation or to the rising inflation, Mr. President?
Indirectly, Your Honor, because what really matters is the interest rate, Your Honor. That's something that can really be felt by the people. So if you have excessive borrowings, and then that can affect your credit rating sometimes, based on your ability to pay, and then that will be reflected in the interest rate, Your Honor, and that can be sometimes be negative, Your Honor. But in our case, I don't think that is the case. In our case.
And interest rate is set by the Bangko Sentral. Yan naman, tama? Am I right? Are we talking about the interest rate which is influenced by the rate set by the Bangko Sentral? Because there's a certain rate which is set by the Bangko Sentral.
Yes, Your Honor, but there are also interest rates which are set by the market based on your creditworthiness, Your Honor. Okay. So those are things we have to watch out for as a sovereign country. To ensure that the benefits of a lower or of creditworthiness translates to a lower interest rate for consumers, for the public, etc.
Okay, even on creditworthiness, I think we also made some assumptions there. Pupunta tayo doon mamaya. So okay, so if it turns out that the actual inflation rate for 2023 will really be 6.2%, which is above our projection, what will be the implication of just this particular factor on the budget for 2024 and its execution?
Affect the budget from 6.2%.
Pwedeng wala.
It doesn't really affect the budget, Your Honor.
Thank you. I will accept such an answer, Mr. President. I'm just getting the position of the executive branch. So, it's the ano tawag mo nun, hindi naman miscalculation ito eh, the misappreciation as far as inflation is concerned will turn out to be immaterial if it is that small. Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, then we made some assumptions on the price of the Dubai crude oil. Tama. When we made the budget, ang assumption po ng ating economic team, it will be $70 to $90 per barrel for this year. So, how has this turned out, Mr. President?
What's the price of Dubai crude?
Right now, kumusta si Dubai crude oil?
Dubai crude, 70 to 90.
Tanong next natin. Mababa ba ngayon ang Dubai crude oil?
So tama. Mr. President, pasok pa rin sa 70 to 90 kasi the current price of Dubai is 81, I'm told,
Okay.
Your Honor. So,
Yes, so pasok. So, therefore, if that holds up to the end of the year, so it should not affect the budget execution and the budget. We also made an assumption as to the peso to dollar exchange rate. Sabi po ng ating economic team for 2023, it should be within the range of 54 pesos to 57 pesos to a dollar. Oh, so, kumusta po itong assumption na ito? Is it correct? Valid? Magkano ba siya ngayon?
right now, it's below 56. For the year, it will still be within the range?
Yeah.
Yes, it will still be within the range,
Okay,
I'm
so
told.
good. So good. Congratulations for that, for the accurate projection made by our economic team, Mr. President. We also made an assumption that our goods exports growth rate bali ito, will be 1%. But there was an admission that you lowered this from 3%. Maybe in the past years the assumption was 3%. So may we know why? From the very start, our economic team already was parang anong tawag mo dyan? Pessimistic about goods exports growth rate, Mr. President. It will still grow, pero binabaan natin to 1% lang ating projection.
Well, it's in anticipation of the lower global demand, Your Honor.
May we know the year to date? What is the goods export growth year to date?
Negative 5.4%.
Yun. So how will the negative 0.5 or 5?
Negative 5.4.
Wow, 5. Okay. So nakita natin yung swing, Mr. President. Kanyari ganun. So assumption is exports will grow, goods exports will grow by 1%. Reality says, oops, nag-contract by negative 5.4%. How will this affect now the budget as well as its execution next year, Mr. President?
What's the effect of the budget? On the budget.
Nag-contract pala. So, humina export natin pala. Sama. Paano labanin?
There is no real impact in terms of budget execution, Your Honor, because the revenues will be unaffected. So the revenues will still be able to fund whatever we put in the budget or whatever's in the budget in terms of expenditures. So there is.
So, yes, may we know why? Why parang the goods export growth rate does not even matter as to revenue collections? So,
No, it matters with respect to the macroeconomic picture, Your Honor. But I think I was my understanding of your question is that you're asking what is the effect on the budget and budget execution. It doesn't really affect the budget, Your Honor. But
even collection, revenue collection, it does not affect?
yeah, but greater revenues because you have more imports. Yeah, you have greater imports, Your Honor. So there is actually more revenue. So that's one result. That's one way of looking at it. No, but of course, it's not. If you look at it from another standpoint, obviously it's not purely positive, Your Honor. But in terms of my understanding of your question was how will the budget be affected in terms of funding the budget? Andun pa rin yung revenues, andun pa rin yung suporta because your imports the imports are still there. Yung exports do not factor into that equation, Your Honor.
Di ba income sana yun ng ating taxpayer din? The exports should have also been an income of a Filipino or Philippine-based taxpayer, Mr. President.
Yes, to a certain extent, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, that's actually my next question because we also made a goods import growth rate projection. It's mentioned in the President's budget message. And for this year, when you prepared the budget for 2024, 2% growth rate ang inisip nyo for imports. And that was down also from 4% siguro sa previous year assumption ninyo. So, it's good to be realistic. Tama, maganda yan when we make assumptions. So, why were we realistic / pessimistic when we lowered? Actually, happy nga ako na lower ang imports kasi sa trade deficit yan eh. So why did we do this, Mr. President? Assumptions from the very start, nag-assume na sila 2%, hindi 4%.
There's also lower commodity prices, Your Honor. And secondly is, bumagsak din yung ekonomiya ng ibang bansa. So, there's less, I think, or even the local economy, there's less demand. So, it's a factor of demand also. And lower commodity prices according to the economic managers, Your Honor.
So this was the projection. So may we get the year to date? Goods imports, bale to, growth rate.
It's negative 5.3, Your Honor.
Okay, so mas kumonte. Okay, so parang, okay, from the figures given to us, international trade of the Philippines contracted. Tama? Is that the correct conclusion? Negative growth rate si export eh. Negative
Yes, Your
growth
Honor.
rate si import eh. Okay. So, sige po. Thank you. So, and okay, given this year to date na ibabangga natin ngayon sa assumption, will this now again
Yung pinag-uusapan natin yung goods ho. But
Goods,
in
yeah.
terms of services ho, it's the picture is reversed because positive naman ho. Yung projection is 17%, pero yung actual is 22%. So it's nababalanse yun yung negative, yung pagka-negative nung goods ay nagiging positibo po sa services.
but the imports growth assumption made by the DBCC, what was it about? The goods or services or joint?
It's for both, Your Honor.
So that 2% assumption pala was for both? Ganun ba?
Goods lang daw ho yun, yung
Tama,
2%.
yun ang tinatanong ko.
Goods lang ho yun, goods
Yung
lang
point,
ho yun.
sa goods lang po. Opo.
Yes.
Sige,
Because
so,
iba yung figure ho sa services.
sige, can we get the, Mr. President, can we get the figures for services?
For services for 2023, Your Honor, the growth for exports was projected to be 17%, and for imports it was 11%. But the actual growth of services turned out to be 22.2,
22, okay.
and for imports it was 12.5.
Okay. So services. So both increased. Okay, sige. Pero yung goods kasi, goods manufacturing kasi medyo critical eh. That's the
Yes.
one which is proven to really create jobs for economies, Mr. President. Okay, so back to my question. Same question with the goods exports. Sa goods imports, Mr. President, binabaan natin yung assumption natin, and yet the year to date mas mababa pa. So same question, Mr. President. Any anticipated effects of this one on the budget as well as its execution for next year?
Which figure ho? Sorry.
The goods imports contraction, Mr. President.
So less revenue. Well, this one affects the revenues because the lessening of imports also lessens your revenues, Your Honor. So there may be a slight impact on the ability to finance projects, Your Honor. Tama ba?
Oo nga. So, since we have established the contraction in as far as goods trading, okay, is concerned, pagdating sa goods, has it been affecting our 2023 budget, Mr. President?
No, Your Honor. No.
Ano, it's not. Okay, so ang ibig sabihin, correct me if I'm wrong, no? Kasi I'm sure every quarter ba meron tayong expected revenue collection. Are we so far for 2023? Naka 3 quarters na po tayo. Have we met the revenue collections?
They're above target, Your Honor, for the revenues, on the revenue side.
Okay. Because the next assumption underpinning our budget for 2024 is about revenues. The assumption is that this will increase annually by average of 11.2%. So are we going to hold this, affirm this for year 2023? Are we still on track, Mr. President?
Projected lang. So far, actual. There's an actual increase of 6.79%, Your Honor. Year to date.
6.79%, okay.
Yes.
So, did we make the assumption when we made the NEP 2024 that revenues for 2023 would grow by 11.2%? And since if we could not meet that, what is the effect, Mr. President?
What is the
Kasi year to date, 6%, di ba? Ano ba, tama ba? 6% ba sinabi?
ito ba yan? 14.6? Is that 14.6? 14.6, ito ba yan? That's your projected, 14.6% increase. Ah. 14.
Tapos, maharli ka nga, i-follow up ko yung mga tanong ni Sulat.
The projected for 2024 is 14.6%, Your Honor.
14, mataas. Mataas. So, are we going to hit that? Given na, kanina, I think you nag-year to date kayo, 6% lamang?
Well, the projected for 2023 was actually 5.2. So, mas mataas pa rin tayo. Yung 6.79 so far, still higher than the projected, Your Honor.
Yes, yun na. So, that means, are we being too ambitious for 2024? At 14%? 14% na sinabi.
They say it's realistic, Your Honor.
Okay.
Mas alam nila yung yan.
Nga. We're just here to to find out where the truth lies, Mr. President. Bring our feet back to the ground, Mr. President. I think that's the role of the minority.
Yes, Your Honor. They say it's a realistic assumption, Your Honor.
Realistic assumption,
yes.
okay. Okay. And then, given what we know now, kasi kaya nga, di ba, we made assumptions in June eh. Ano na ngayon, November na eh. Given what we know now, so we can now probably project it to 2024, were the assumptions that we made when we drafted and crafted the 2024 NEP still valid, Mr. President? If not all of them, which ones ang hindi na valid, and how will it affect the budget as well as its execution?
All the heads are nodding behind me, Your Honor.
Confident, still
Yes,
confident.
they're all valid, yes. There is no one is shaking their head.
Yes, okay. So these were well-studied assumptions and projections, Mr. President. Okay. So, which should have been done talaga naman. Oh. Okay. See you next year na lang. For the last time. Okay. I think the confidence is backed up because of some plan. There's a plan by the administration to propose revenue-generating measures and structural reforms daw. So yung revenue generation measures must be some new ones. Are there some new ideas, Mr. President, to be introduced and which are anticipated to be effective by next year to help in revenue collection? Ano po ito, Mr. President?
Well, there are proposed revenue measures, Your Honor. Yung VAT on digital service providers, yung PIFITA, or the Passive Income and Financial Intermediary Taxation, the excise tax on single-use plastics and pre-mixed alcoholic beverages, the excise tax on sweetened beverages and junk food, the mining fiscal regime, and the motor vehicle road users tax, Your Honor. These are some of the proposed measures from the DOF.
I think that's what gives them the confidence. Pero mag-ingat-ingat lang po tayo kung baka additional pabigat po sa taong bayan.
Yes, Your Honor.
Lalo na yung huling dalawa. Ano yung dalawa? Yung isa, yung motor vehicles
MVUC,
users
ano?
charge na naman. Medyo mahal-mahal na ngayon maging may-ari ng motor vehicle. Grabe ang mga registration fee. Ano yung second to the last? Yung sa mining, sir, yun sana. Maganda siguro yung sa mining. Dapat siguro talaga naman the state should get its fair share of the exploitation of our natural resources. Wala namang manufacturer niyan eh. Gift sa atin yan eh. Gift sa taong bayan, hindi dun sa taong nakakuha ng konsesyon na binigay na isang taong hindi hinalal ng bayan. Ganun ang sistema natin, tama ba? This MPSA, all of these concession agreements are given by a functionary in a department na hindi naman elected by the people. Wala naman siya periodic review ng mandato niya sa taong bayan. And he gives a favor to private citizens, to private corporations. They exploit commodity which they do not manufacture. Ano yan? Ano tawag mo doon? Blessings of God to the Filipino people. So what's the plan for that, Mr. President? Pipigain ba natin ang mining sector to generate more revenues for the government, or we will be even more lenient to the mining sector, Mr. President?
Ano yung ano nun? Well, there are estimates of what they can, what income they can generate or what revenue they can generate from a new mining fiscal regime, Your Honor.
May bill na ba yan?
Around 12 to 14 billion a year. I suppose this is by increasing the charges for. If memory serves me correctly, Your Honor, it's based on the amount of minerals that you doon nakabase yung tax. So it's indexed to the weight, Your Honor. So I suppose they'll be increasing the rates as they go along.
That's 12 to 14 billion in new additional revenues. Ganun po ba yan?
Yes, Your
On
Honor.
top of existing siguro.
Yes, Your Honor.
Siguro, is there already a bill filed in the Senate or prepared by the executive branch, ready for filing?
Wala pa po sa Senado, nasa House po.
Nasa House. Okay. Sige. Mr. President, the Deputy Minority Leader wants to interject.
Yes, Senator Risa Ontiveros is recognized.
Salamat kayo, Mr. President, and with the indulgence of the good chair and my minority leader, this is a really important question. I think the good chair is right. There is no bill yet filed in the Senate on a new mining fiscal regime, but this representation has a bill on an alternative minerals management bill. I also remember in the previous administration, or was it the previous administration before that, there was an executive order issued by the president that, interestingly, was not completely acceptable to environmental movements, but was not also completely acceptable to the chambers of mines. So interesting, because maybe there was an opening to come to something more mutually acceptable between the two parties or among all the parties. And last but not the least, Mr. President, meron pa pong pending kaso sa Korte Suprema precisely on the issue of a new fiscal regime for the mining industry. So, ang ganda eh, in all three branches of government, the contest can be joined and generate legislation, new programs, even jurisprudence on this important question. So yun lang po, dagdag, Mr. President, to the very important part of this conversation now between our two colleagues. Salamat kayo.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank you very much.
Senator Risa, Vice Chair Risa.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we're talking about revenues eh. Yung, di ba there's a metric, parang may metric yan eh, na how much of your budget or your expenditure is being raised by your revenues. So for 2024, what is that? What is that the metric, Mr. President?
How much of your expenditure
What is that called? Can I get guidance from our budget experts? What is that called? Yung parang revenue to budget, ano ba yan? Ratio? Ano pong tawag dyan?
How much?
Nalimutan ko lang.
Revenue over appropriations. If you're talking about revenue over appropriations, it's 74%, Your Honor.
Revenue over... okay, 74% revenue over appropriations. Okay.
26 ang inutang mo. Tama? Tama.
Ang ibig po bang sabihin nito, kanyari, so kung 74%, ang ibig sabihin nito, sa kada 100 piso na ino-authorize nating gastusin, tayo mismo ang nagpundo ng 74 at uutangin yung 26 pesos doon.
It's correct, Your Honor.
To be borrowed. Okay. Has this been increasing? If we can ask the DBM to look at the trend over the years, has the revenue over appropriation percentage, what is the behavior of that ratio, Mr. President?
Because, di ba, mas malaki ang utang dati? Has it always been at 70+? Yeah. And because the budget is constant, increases also. It's more or less constant, Your Honor, because all the factors are increasing.
Constant lang. The
Roughly, right.
the MTFF has no has no position on the revenue to appropriations ratio, Mr. President.
Well, to be exact, it has been increasing actually, although roughly not by dramatic numbers, Your Honor, because in 2022 it was at 68%. In 2023 it's 70%, and for 2024 it's 74%. Projected, of course.
Yes,
For
projected.
2024, Your Honor. So that
Yes,
shows,
that-
that shows less borrowing.
That affects
more.
the deficit to GDP ratio?
Yes, Your Honor.
Tama,
Yes.
that affects it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so can we, yes, so okay, if we can go to the details, Mr. President, of our budget next year. The proposed national budget is 5.768 trillion pesos, Mr. President. And then therefore, and then revenues will be how much, Mr. President?
Projected is 4.073 trillion, Your Honor.
Trillion. Okay, which now gives us the deficit, di ba? Ganun po yan. The revenues would come from who are our top revenue generating agencies, Mr.
The figure I gave is just the tax, Your Honor.
The
because
BIR
there
would generate-
Yeah, the BIR is the biggest with around 3.04 trillion. The BOC is next with around 1 trillion roughly. And then you have the smaller figures given by various offices like LTO, BFP, DNR, BI, Bureau of Immigration, and then you have Bureau of Treasury Income, among others, Your Honor.
The balance, that would be the balance, Mr. President.
The total revenues would be around, anticipated to be 4.27 trillion, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yeah, the earlier figure I gave is the tax revenue only. Your
Tax only, okay.
Honor. Yes.
So
4.272 trillion, Your Honor.
tax and non-tax, yes. Thank you. So thank you for that, Mr. President. Therefore, giving us the budget deficit figure of
Budget deficit figure.
but that would be ano no?
1.3 trillion.
One
1.35 trillion, Your Honor, roughly. Anong page yan? 3.3.
tama ba? 1.35 trillion. Ima-minus lang yung dalawa. In absolute terms, the budget deficit for next year is lower than what was projected for the 2023 budget.
Yes, Your Honor.
So congratulations for that, Mr. President. Kasi sabi ng notes ko nga, ang budget deficit natin last year was 1.6 trillion. Pero after execution, doon natin malalaman yung
Actual.
what is the actual, right, Mr. President?
Tama po.
But year to date, Mr. President, as far as the budget deficit for 2023 is concerned, are we just on target or are we doing better? Better in the sense na lesser ang deficit, Mr. President?
We're doing better than expected, according to them, Your Honor.
So congratulations again, Mr. President. You will rarely hear this from me, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Honor.
But the answers are surprising me, and I'm glad. I'm glad to be surprised, Mr. President. Isa lang naman bansa natin eh. Isang bansa na we want our country to succeed,
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Thank you for your patriotism, Your Honor.
So, Mr. President, according to the President's budget message, government disbursements will be sustained at 20% of GDP on average. So, tama ba yan? Ito ba yun? Ito na yan? This is
Government
the
disbursements.
disbursement. That should be the budget, di ba? That should be the budget.
Yes, 20%, Your Honor.
So it's above, our budget is above 20% of our GDP.
5.7% GDP.
Infrastructure spending will be around 5 to 6% of GDP. Did we also,
Yes, Your Honor.
did you also follow this?
Yes, we're at,
So if I were to ask, what is the amount of, total amount for infrastructure spending?
for
Are we ready?
2020, for which year, Your Honor?
For next year, for 2024. Because sinasabi natin 5 to 6% yun of GDP.
It's around 1.4, Your Honor, across the budget, Your Honor.
1.4 trillion.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, and this would be basically found in DPWH, DOTR.
DOTR.
Yun yung dalawa would account,
biggest, those
would
are the
account
biggest,
for the
Your Honor.
bulk of that 1.4.
Yes, Your Honor.
Tignan mo yung deficit natin. Oh. Ilang percent yan? And then our projected budget deficit, Mr. President, 1.35 trillion. What is the projected, what is the projected GDP for 2024? Of course, we also made that projection, di ba?
What's the projected GDP?
Siguro growth rate lang naman yun. Current
Hindi
GDP
growth.
times
Actual
growth
GDP
rate.
figure.
Yun ang na-project.
For 2024? 26.6 trillion, Your Honor, approximately. Yeah.
Lumaki naman pala. Lumaki naman pala. Sige nga, yan mo nga si ano. Now, what is now Mr. President, what is our national debt to GDP ratio as of the moment, Mr. President?
For the current year, Your Honor?
Yes, if they have real time as of November, kung kaya, kung hindi, what is the latest?
Walang later figure. As of June, it's 61%, Your Honor.
61%, okay. Do we have a target, Mr. President, that by the end of year 2024, what should be that national government debt to GDP ratio?
Yeah, 59.5%, Your Honor.
Okay, so by next year na lang siguro tatanungin din natin if we can meet it, no? So our borrowing for this year, for 2023, has been following the plan, the program. We have not had any borrowing which is a surprise borrowing, which is we were forced by circumstances to go beyond the plan, Mr. President.
Wala po. We're on track.
Per plan po tayo. Okay.
Apo.
We have noticed, Mr. President, that there are some items in our budget na parang they start high in the NEP, they end up low in the GAA. There are some items naman, they start low in the NEP, end up high in the GAA. And this phenomenon happens year after year after year. Akala ko ba the DBM, when they prepare the budget, they look at the past, of course, performance or usage of the budget. Why are there some items in our budget where they always start high? When they know that at the end of the day, the budget law, will provide for a lower figure, Mr. President, a substantially lower figure, in fact. So just a theoretical explanation, Mr. President. Kasi 'di ba si DBM, very strict kayo sa mga agencies, yung level of this year affects the level of next year. And yet there are some items in the budget na it always is there at the stratosphere, pero pag napakatapos ng pag-GAA na siya, it's to a lower level. Mr.
Yes,
President.
you're correct, Your Honor, in certain cases or certain departments or budgets. But from the DBM standpoint, it's always NEP to NEP, Your Honor, meaning when they prepared the 2024 NEP, they were looking at the 2023 NEP. And when they look at the 2025 NEP, they will still look at the 2024 NEP rather than the that year's GAA. That's been the practice, Your Honor.
So DBM will continue with that practice even though experience already, decades-long experience is already telling us that your NEP figures are not based on reality, Mr. President. Masyado mataas. Example, I'll give an example. MPBF. 2023 NEP, 89 billion. GAA, 26. I'm rounding off, 26 billion. So, and if we go back years past, ganun din ang behavior. We always start high, we end up low. Ngayon, we're starting sa NEP natin 135 billion. And siguro, a fearless forecast, the ending figure for that would be, in the GAA for 2024, would be below that. So, why is this practice being maintained by DBM, Mr. President? May formula ba ito for you to come up with a NEP figure? Do you apply a formula? So may we know the formula?
Formula for the NEP of MPBF. Yeah, what is the formula every year? Ang tanong. Ang tanong niya, what is the basis? What is the formula? Not whether, why is the increase? What is the formula for every year for computing?
Oo, tapos may inauguration.
For others po, yung feeling of yung to support po yung creation.
PGF ko na example.
Of the total.
Yes po. And the rest po yung
Kaya ako nagtanong kasi.
mga kinakailangan such as PBB, depende po yun sa computation po natin. Mga projections, projected estimates po natin.
Oh, nga, pero how did you come up with the projection? For the figure every year? What's the basis?
For the PBB po yung base po siya.
Ay, hindi, tatanungin ko yung education. Kung na-maintain ba na, respeto ba natin yung education as the highest priority? So,
60 to 80%.
wala bang kabangga sa education?
You assume a rate of eligibility.
Yes po, sir. Pero po yung sa feeling po, automatic po yung system generated po yung ating formula, sir, na 30%.
Sa 30% bukat.
The total, ano po, 30% of the total is cost of the unfilled positions po. Nasa budget po.
There are certain metrics that they use, Your Honor. I forgive the long. I was trying to understand because the MPBF is made up of several components, Your Honor. Yung filling up the new positions, etc. Performance-based bonus or PBB. So sa PBB, performance-based bonus, they assume that 60 to 80% will be eligible to receive the PBB. With respect to the filling of positions, they assume 30% of the PS cost of unfilled civilian positions. Yun po yung mga yun yung thought process nila dito sa MPBF, Your Honor.
Yes, yun yung then they apply a formula, then they arrive at that. So, is the plan to continue with this practice even though we know na hindi? I mean, it's the amount that we propose is 3 times higher than what is actually used by or authorized by Congress to be used for that purpose. For the same purposes, binababaan natin yung amount for the same purposes, binababaan ng Congress. So, is that a good practice to retain, Mr. President?
Ayaw nila na mawalan daw tayo ng trabaho, Mr. Minority Leader, pagka sinundan lang nila yung GA, di parang wala nang role yung... No, seriously speaking, I think they just really base it on the NEP. I think that's been the tradition. They just work from NEP to NEP, Your Honor. So, maybe if you have any
Yeah.
concrete proposals, then they can take it under consideration.
Because they
Your
don't
Honor.
do it, for the other agencies, does the DBM do that, NEP to NEP? Or they look at what is the actual figure in the GAA also, Mr. President? Ano yan? Andito.
Yes, as a general rule, yes, they look at the previous year's NEP, but they also consider the inclinations or priorities of the president, of course.
Oh, okay,
If the president,
Yeah, I agree
so
with
that's why certain programs receive greater allocations in certain years, Your Honor, depending on, I think that's why maybe anti-drug programs and certain peace and order programs receive greater allocations during the previous administration, Your Honor.
I agree with that, Mr. President. And I believe that's the reason why the budget emanates from the executive. It should reflect the priorities of the executive branch, Mr. President. That's why you get the mandate from the people, i-deliver mo ngayon yung campaign promises mo. So, diyan ka rin susukatin kung natupad mo o hindi, Mr. President. So, okay, so unfortunately, the practice will continue so that, if I understand correctly, our chairman, so that Congress has still work to do, Mr. President.
Baka wala na tayong gagawin, Mr. President. I'm just kidding. Well, I think even not only the DBM, but even us as an institution, if we look at it, we're really bound by certain practices, no? Unless, and then there is a certain amount of inertia built in institutions, you know. Unless there is a compelling reason to change certain practices, then they usually stay that way, Your Honor.
Siguro, Mr. President, sige, let's just talk about this one last point before we go on lunch break. The NEP is 5.768 trillion. Okay. So we're talking about the committee report of the Senate. How much of that amount, sir, Mr. President, ang ginalaw po ng ating committee? Ang gumalaw. So, because that's the extent of yung pakikialam ng Congress eh. Hanggang doon lang tayo nakialam eh, sa executive's budget eh.
In the House, around 210 billion movement. In the Senate, around 60 billion, Your Honor. Yes.
Okay, para lang to put it into context, no, Mr. President. So, we received the executive's budget of 5 trillion 768 billion.
Yes, Your Honor.
Committee report natin just touches on items with a total amount of
60 billion.
60 billion.
Yes, Your Honor.
So that's and we will spend 8 days on those on this work, Mr. President.
Hindi kasi yung 8 days, hindi lang naman yung 60 ang pinag-uusapan,
Correct,
Mr.
correct,
President. We talk about other aspects also. In fact, we even talk about the aspects that we cannot change, like the automatic appropriations, the personnel services. In practice, the reality is we cannot change that, but we talk about it nonetheless. Right?
But after the 8 days, with the insights that we gain, we will still be allowed to propose amendments.
Certainly,
Yes,
certainly,
so
Mr.
because
President.
after that would come the period for amendments, Mr.
Yes,
President.
yes, Your Honor.
That's it. So that's the purpose of our 8-day interpellations, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, pupunta pa tayo sa
Parang gusto nyo
Maharlika.
iksiyan yung 8 days. Minority Leader.
Depende, sir. Depende. Depende because we're getting good news from good figures. Ito facts naman yung tinanong ko kanina.
Yes, yes, Your Honor.
Those are not projections. Pagdating sa projections, medyo siyempre, if it's so rosy or positive, medyo ingat tayo. But we were asking for facts, figures. Of course, subject to some double checking if we have the capacity to double check. Okay, Mr. President, we'll siguro after lunch, when we resume, let's go to the unprogrammed, yung principles lang po, the principles behind the unprogrammed, did we respect the prioritization for education, kumpara natin sa ibang expenditures, and of course, Maharlika, the BSP dividends, etc., Mr. President. So I don't mind, Mr. President, that we have a lunch break, Mr. President.
It's up to the body, Your Honor, to decide.
Hindi, ang dami pang tanong. Diba? Anyway, Mr. President, it will be the same resource persons will be,
Yes, Your Honor.
will have to come back to defend their agencies, Mr. President. So
Baka pwede pa, Minority Leader, until 12:30? Or you're hungry na?
But it's the same,
Alright.
unless I'm wrong, Mr. President, it will be the same resource persons.
It's the same,
Mr.
Your Honor.
President, yes.
Yeah.
So what's the pleasure of the body? What time would we want to come back to work?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd just like to inform, for the afternoon session, for the following departments to get ready, Department of Budget Management, NEDA, and the Department of Finance for the hearing proper. And we'll resume session at 1:45, if that's
After
okay.
di ba,
For the
meron
minority
tayong
leader.
inauguration eh. After your unveiling.
I know there's an unveiling of the marker. Maybe around, if it's with the permission of our sponsor, 1:45, we come back at 1:45?
It's your call, Mr. President, yeah.
Yeah, which is an unveiling lang upstairs on the third floor. Yeah, so 1:45, Your Honor. All right, session suspended till 1:45 in the afternoon.